Okay, let's unpack this. When people, the public or even newer agents talk about real estate commissions, they often picture this like fixed number, maybe 5% of a huge sale price, right? And they just assume that chunk, that whole percentage, is what the agent
Oh
pockets.
yeah, that's probably the biggest misconception out there. Seriously, that figure, say 5%, it's not really the agent's payment, not directly. It's more like a gross revenue pool.
Hmm.
And it has to cover this whole ecosystem of costs and splits and fees before the person who actually did the legwork sees, a single penny of net profit,
Yeah.
the actual take home. Often it's, well, startlingly small compared to that initial number.
Right, and that shocking difference, that gap between the big gross commission number and the net reality, that's exactly what we're digging into today. This deep dive is all built around this thing called the developer commission calculator model. It's specifically designed to strip away all those assumptions and show the real financial workings behind big developer deals, particularly in the Jamaican market.
Exactly. And this model, it's actually part of a bigger toolkit. There are calculators for mortgages, construction costs, rental yields, affordability metrics, all sorts of things for Jamaican property. But this developer commission one, it's unique because it forces you to be brutally honest about the agent's actual bottom line.
So our mission here is to really demystify that whole financial chain for you, the listener. We
Mhm.
need to go beyond just saying, oh, there's a 50% split here, a 5% fee there.
Right.
We need to understand the exact order things get deducted, how the co-broke hits first, then the brokerage splits, maybe franchise fees, desk fees, all those operating costs, how they stack up one after another. This is basically your shortcut to grasping the real mechanics of profit, especially when you're dealing with projects that have lots of units.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that success in these big deals, it absolutely hinges on getting that calculation order right. If you mix up the sequence, like if you apply a franchise fee before the main broker split by mistake, your whole profit model is going to be wrong. You'll think you're making more than you are, and you'll end up feeling shortchanged later. So what we're doing is giving you the blueprint to avoid those nasty financial surprises.
Okay, let's start right at the top then. Where does the money first appear?
So the very first step in this calculator model is just figuring out the maximum possible money that could come in.
Right.
We have to set the basic parameters for the whole project. What are those key bits of info we need right at the start to define that total commission pool? Yeah, you need three basic things up front. First, the total number of units that the agent or the team is responsible for selling. Let's use the example from our research to make it concrete. Say 29 units in a development. Second, you need the expected price per unit. Again, just to keep the math straightforward, let's peg that at, say, $100 million. And third, the basic commission percentage that's been agreed with the developer. For high-end stuff in Jamaica, that's often around 5%.
Okay, so simple math. 5% of $100 million. That means the starting gross commission pool per unit is $5 million. That's the absolute maximum possible, the ceiling. But, that money immediately faces maybe the biggest potential cut of all, the co-broke conundrum.
Absolutely critical point. This is where things diverge immediately. The co-broke percentage dictates the external split. It's the slice of that $5 million pool that you must pay out to another agent or brokerage if they're the ones who bring the buyer to the table. It instantly splits the pool into your side and the other side.
And in Jamaica, what's the usual deal with co-brokes, especially if it's, say, listed on the MLS?
The standard practice, kind of the rule of thumb, is a 50-50 split. If it's on the MLS, you typically expect to co-broke 50% of the total commission. So, going back to our $5 million pool, if another agent brings the buyer, $2.5 million is instantly earmarked for them. Gone.
Wow. Just like that. Half the potential money walks out the door before the listing agent even thinks about their own costs or splits with their own broker.
Yeah, completely changes the game. And now 50% is standard, but sometimes developer contracts might specify something different, maybe 40% co-broke, which is a bit better for the listing agent. But you have to model for that 50% worst-case scenario because that half dictates the absolute maximum gross profit you could possibly make from that deal.
So for you, the listener, trying to model this, the absolute best-case scenario financially is the direct sale. What does that mean for the co-broke percentage?
A direct sale means you, the listing agent, found the buyer yourself, no other agent involved in bringing them in. In that case, the co-broke percentage is 0%. And that's the only way that the entire initial $5 million commission pool stays on your side.
Okay, so understanding this first split is just, it's everything, isn't it? That initial fork in the road direct
Yep.
sale, 0%, versus co-broke sale, potentially 50%. immediately sets the stage. You've either kept the full J $5 million on your side of the ledger, or you've only kept J $2.5 million. And every single fee that comes next gets applied to whichever number you're left with.
It really dictates your whole strategy for the rest of the deal. If you know you're likely facing a 50% co-broke on many units, you absolutely have to be aggressive in negotiating down every other internal split and keeping a tight lid on your expenses, because the pot you're drawing from just got cut in half right at the start.
All right, so we've established your side. Let's stick with the worst case 50% co-broke for now, meaning we're starting with J $2.5 million from that initial J $5 million pool. Now we dive into the internal pressures, the fees and splits charged by the brokerage you actually work for. This is where the layers really start to pile up, one after another.
Exactly. So the first internal layer you typically hit is the broker split. And it's really crucial to remember this split is calculated only on your side of the commission, the part left after any co-broke payout. This is the money that goes to your principal broker, for providing the license, the supervision, the office infrastructure, carrying the insurance and liability,
Right.
all that stuff.
Okay, let's keep the math easy and stick with a 50-50 broker split model, which isn't uncommon, especially for newer agents maybe. So if my side is J $2.5 million and my broker split is 50%, that's J $1.25 million straight to the broker, ouch, leaving me, the agent doing the work, with the remaining J $1.25 million.
Precisely. That J $1.25 million is what we'd call the after-split amount. And yeah, broker splits can vary a lot. You might see 50%, maybe 60-40 favoring the broker. Or for really high-performing agents, maybe they'd negotiate a 70-30 split in their favor. But whatever that percentage is, it's the first big chunk taken out internally, and it directly pays the brokerage itself.
Now, here's where it gets, well, even trickier for the agent trying to figure out their actual profit. Once that main broker split is done, we often run into another fee, the brokerage franchise fee.
Right. This is the second layer, and it often causes confusion. People ask, why two deductions? Think of it like this. The broker split pays the actual broker you work under for their direct oversight and liability. The franchise fee, which is usually a smaller percentage, maybe 5%, like in our examples, that's often the cost of the brand. You're paying for using the big franchisor's name, like a RE/MAX or Century 21, et cetera, their global network, their specific tech platforms, their operating systems.
Functionally, that makes sense, but financially, the real kicker is when it gets applied. I think most people, especially if they're new to this, would probably assume that 5% franchise fee comes off the top, maybe off the J $5 million pool, or at least off the J $2.5 million your side. Why is it standard in many models for it to be applied after the agent's main split?
Well, it's essentially a way for the franchisor to guarantee their piece,
Right.
while ensuring it comes directly from the agent's share, not the broker's share. Let's think about it. If that 5% fee was applied to the original J $5 million pool, the franchise gets J $250,000. If it's applied after the 50% co-broke and the 50% broker split, meaning it's applied to the agent's remaining J $1.25 million, then the franchise only collects J $62,500. So by applying it sequentially after the agent split, it takes a bite directly out of what the agent thought they had left. It's a subtle but pretty effective squeeze on the agent's remaining funds.
Okay, let's run that number. So from that J $1.25 million left after the broker split, a 5% franchise fee is another J $62,500 gone, bringing the agent's gross amount before any personal expenses down to J $1,187,500. Wow, this stacking of percentage is pretty brutal.
And remember that key tip from the research. Some brokerage setups, especially the big franchises, they deliberately structure it this way. They apply both a potentially large broker split and then a smaller percentage franchise fee after that split. You absolutely have to account for both in your model. If you miss that second fee, your profit projection will be off by potentially tens of thousands of JMD per sale.
Okay, so beyond the percentage cuts, there are also the fixed costs the brokerage might charge, right? The desk fees. These are more like operational costs, and they need to be spread out across the project somehow.
Exactly. Desk fees cover things like your physical desk space, maybe shared admin help, printer use, basic office utilities, that kind of thing. They can be charged monthly, or sometimes there's an annual fee. For a big multi-unit project, the crucial part is how you handle the annual fees. Amortization. You need to spread that cost out.
Can we make that more concrete? Abstract explanations can be tricky. Let's say an agent pays an annual desk fee of J $120,000. And we're still working with our 29-unit project that we estimate will take 12 months on market to sell through. How does that amortization actually work in the calculation?
Okay, good example. First, you figure out the monthly hit. So J $120,000 divided by 12 months. That's a J $10,000 fixed cost burden every month related to this project. Then, that J $10,000 monthly cost needs to be allocated across the units expected to sell over the project's life. In a multi-unit model like this, the sensible approach is to assume this cost is shared equally across all 29 units over the whole 12 months.
So the total fixed desk fee the entire project has to absorb over the year is J $120,000. How do we get that down to a per unit cost?
You just divide the total annual cost, J $120,000, by the total number of units, 29. That gives you an amortized desk fee cost of about, let me see, roughly J $4,138 per unit. It seems small per unit, but by calculating it this way, you ensure that the total overhead is properly accounted for and spread out. You avoid having that entire J $120,000 hit the profit calculation of the very first unit sold, which would obviously look terrible.
Yeah, the importance of doing that calculation correctly is super clear now. All these fees, which might look small on their own, like that 5% franchise fee, or the J $4,138 desk fee per unit, they really stack up fast. And it's precisely because they're applied sequentially, often to a pot of money that's already been slashed by maybe 50% co-broke, then another 50% broker split.
Exactly. Every single decision about who gets what percentage and, critically, in what order they get it just dramatically chips away at what's left for the agent. It really only takes a few percentage points here and there to turn what looked like a really juicy six-figure gross profit into something pretty negligible once you factor in your own operating costs.
Okay, so now we're at step 3 in the model. And this, I think, is often what separates the really professional planners from maybe the more optimistic agents. This is about factoring in the agent's own costs and their own time. These are the expenses coming directly out of the agent's pocket before they see any net commission. And it connects how much work you do directly to how much you earn.
Absolutely. You have to quantify the effort involved. It's not optional for accurate modeling. The guide makes you track time and activity metrics. We already use months on market, 12 months, for our 29 units to figure out amortization. But you also need things like trips per month. How often do you physically need to go to the site to check on things, meet potential buyers, manage viewings? Let's say the agent estimates 4 trips a month are needed. Over 12 months, that's 48 trips just for this one development project.
And each of those trips has immediate real costs, right? The out-of-pocket stuff that just bleeds cash flow. The model forces you to input those specific costs. Fuel and lunch per trip. It sounds minor, but it adds up. If you spend, say, J $3,000 on gas and grab a J $1,500 lunch each time you go, that's J $4,500 per visit. Multiply that by 48 trips. That's J $216,000 in personal travel costs the agent is fronting for this one listing before a single unit might have even sold.
Yep. Then you've got the regular overhead that isn't tied to specific trips. Things like the monthly cost for wear and tear on your car, plus your phone and internet bill. You need to allocate a portion of those to this project. And then, the really big one, often, the total advertising budget. This is the major upfront cash outlay. Professional photos, maybe drone footage, signage, staging costs for a model unit, fees for online portals, social media ad campaigns, everything needed to market 29 high-end units. Let's throw in a number, maybe a total advertising budget of J $500,000 for the whole campaign.
And that J $500,000, somebody has to pay for it up front. Maybe the developer covers some, maybe the agent fronts it, but it has to be accounted for and eventually recovered from the commissions earned. If an agent just ignores these hard costs, they are seriously overestimating their profit potential.
But maybe the deepest, most hidden cost is the agent's own time. The model actually makes you put a value on your labor. You estimate your hours and rate. You need to factor in all the time spent on prep work, setting up the listing, managing inquiries, coordinating viewings, endless phone calls, dealing with offers, the paperwork. Let's say an agent values their time at, I don't know, J $5,000 per hour, and they figure they'll spend about 20 hours per month just managing this project. That's J $100,000 per month in their own time value over 12 months. That's J $1.2 million in implicit labor cost associated with this project.
And if you don't factor in your time as a real cost, you might end up negotiating a commission that doesn't even cover what you could have earned doing something else. You might technically show a net profit on paper, sure, but if you spent, say, 1,000 hours to earn J $500,000 net, your effective hourly rate was only J $500. That's probably not sustainable.
That's exactly why tracking time is so important. It shifts the conversation from just looking at the final dollar amount to understanding your actual compensation rate for the effort involved.
Okay, now we get to what the source calls the aha moment, especially for these big multi-unit developments, the choice of expense allocation method. The agent has to choose. Do I calculate expenses as shared across all units, or do I treat them on a per-unit basis? And apparently, this choice makes a massive difference between getting an accurate picture and getting a completely distorted view of profitability.
It's huge. If you choose per unit, the model assumes every single unit sold bears the entire weight of all the project's expenses. So unit number 1 gets hit with the full J $500,000 advertising budget, the full J $1.2 million labor cost estimate, the full J $216,000 travel costs, everything. That first unit sold would almost certainly show a massive net loss, which is obviously misleading for the project as a whole.
Yeah, that would completely scare off any agent from taking on large projects if they saw that.
Exactly right. That's why the source really hammers this point. The shared method is absolutely essential for multi-unit projects. When you choose shared, those big total campaign costs the J $500 K advertising, the G $1 2 money labor estimate, they get divided equally across all 29 units.
Okay, let's quickly quantify that difference just using the advertising budget. We said J $500,000 total ad spend.
Right. If we allocate that using the shared method, J $500,000 divided by 29 units.
Yeah, right.
And each unit only carries an advertising cost burden of about J $17,241. That's manageable. If we'd mistakenly chosen per unit, that first unit sold would absorb a J $500,000 hit just for advertising. The difference is just enormous. And it really highlights why shared allocation is the only logical way to model this when your revenue scales up with each unit sold, but many of your big initial costs don't.
So for any agent listening who deals with developers on these bigger projects, choosing shared allocation isn't just a suggestion. It's basically mandatory for accurate forecasting. You have to recognize that the cost of getting the whole project launched, the signs, the photos, the initial marketing push is a collective investment in the entire inventory, not just a cost against the first unit that happens to sell. Okay, we've done the hard work. We put in all our inputs, the J $100 million price, the 5% commission. We assume the worst case 50% co-broke, the 50% broker split, the 5% franchise fee, and we figured out our amortized desk fees and our shared operating expenses and time value. Now we get to step 4. Reading the outputs and really understanding this concept of the revenue ladder.
The revenue ladder is it's the non-negotiable sequence of deductions. We've talked about why the order matters so much because applying percentages sequentially has a compounding effect. Let's just quickly recap that order one more time before we plug in the numbers. 1. Start with the commission pool, our J $5 million. 2. First deduction, co-broke, up to 50%. 3. What's left is your side. 4. Next deduction, broker split, percentage off your side. 5. Then the brokerage franchise fee, percentage off the agent's remainder. 6. What's left now is your gross at, pre-expenses. 7. Then you deduct your expenses, calculated using shared or per unit, including your time value. 8. And finally, number 8 is your net profit, the actual take-home.
Right, and the calculator spits out this KPI band, key performance indicators, things like the total net profit for the project, the net per unit, and importantly, it shows exactly how much went to the co-broke agent and how much went to your own broker. But maybe the most useful output, especially for talking to developers, is that per unit breakdown. It turns all those percentages into cold, hard JMD figures, much easier to discuss.
Okay, let's walk through case study A, the standard, worst-case scenario for the listing agent, using the numbers we've been building. Remember, 50% co-broke, 50% broker split, 5% franchise fee. And let's keep the expenses constant for all these cases. We calculated total shared expenses, travel, ads, time, desk fee, etc. We're J $1,716,000 for the project, which works out to J $59,172 per unit when shared across 29 units.
Okay. Unit price, J $100 million. Starting commission pool, J $5 million. Go.
All right. Step 1 and 2, pool and co-broke, 50%. J $2.5 million goes to the co-broke agent. Your side is J $2,500,000. Step 4, broker split, 50%. J $1.25 million of that goes to your broker. Remaining agent money, J $1,250,000. Step 5, franchise fee, 5%. 5% of J $4 initial commission pool after just 3 percentage deductions, co-broke, broker split, franchise fee. The agent is left holding only J $1,187,500. That's less than 24% of the starting amount. That is the reality check right there. It absolutely is. And we haven't even taken out the agent's own operating costs yet. So step 7. Apply those shared expenses, which we calculated as J $59,172 per unit.
Right. So J $1,187,500 minus J $59,172 in expenses.
Yeah.
That leaves the agent with a final net profit of J $1,128,328 per unit.
Now think about that relative to the J $100 million sale price and compared to the initial J $5 million commission, the agent is actually netting about 1.13% of the property sale price, that widely advertised 5% commission. In this scenario, it translates to an effective retained commission rate of just 1.13% for the agent after everyone else takes their cut and all costs are paid.
That quantification, yeah, that's exactly what this deep dive is all about, making that real. Now let's contrast that immediately with case study B, the direct sale comparison. This shows the power, the financial leverage you gain if you control the buyer source and eliminate that co-broke split entirely.
Okay, same starting point, same internal splits at TT 50/50 and franchise fee 5%. Same expenses, J $59,172. The only change is co-broke is 0%. Step 1, pool. J $5 million. Step 2, co-broke 0%. Zero deduction. Your side remains J $5 million. Step 4, broker split 50%. J $2.5 million goes to your broker, remaining agent money. J $2,500,000. Step 5, franchise fee 5%. 5% of J $2.05 is J $125,000. Deduct that. Your gross pre-expenses is J $2,375,000.
Whoa. Okay, so by finding the buyer yourself, your gross income before expenses has literally doubled. J $2 million or $375,000 compared to J $1,187,500.
Exactly. You've kept twice as much revenue on your side of the table. It perfectly illustrates the massive financial impact of that 50% co-broke split. So apply the same J $59,172 in shared expenses per unit. The agent's net profit is J $2,315,828 per unit. That's an effective retained commission rate of about 2.3% of the sale price, almost double the profit just by generating your own lead. It really shows the value of marketing and networking these big deals.
Okay, powerful comparison. Now let's look at case study C, the negotiation squeeze. This is where the tool becomes super practical for an agent sitting down with the developer. Let's see what happens if the developer manages to negotiate the commission rate down from 5% to, say, 2%. We'll keep everything else the same. Worst case, 50% co-broke, 50-50 split, 5% franchise fee, and the J $59,172 expenses.
All right. If the commission rate drops to 2% on a J $100 unit, the starting pool is now only J $2 million. Co-broke, 50%. Deduct J $1 million. Your side is J $1 million. Broker split, 50%. Deduct J $500,000 goes to broker. Remaining agent money, J $500,000. Franchise fee, 5%. 5% of J $500K is J $25,000. Deduct that, your gross pre-expenses, J $475,000.
Okay, now deduct the same J $59,172 in per unit expenses. The agent's net profit is only J $415,828 per unit. That translates to a net retention rate of just 0.41% of the sale price. Wow.
And let's quickly tie this back to the agent's time value we talked about earlier. We estimated J $1.2 million in time cost for the whole project, right? If we amortize that J $1.2 million across 29 units, that's roughly J $41,379 in labor cost per unit. So that J $415,828 net profit per unit suddenly looks a lot less appealing compared to the J $1.1 million net profit per unit we saw at the 5% commission rate, especially when you consider the time investment. Using a calculator like this makes it almost impossible for the agent to ignore the reality. A seemingly small reduction in the headline commission rate from 5% to 2% can absolutely decimate the project's profitability for them once their own time and costs are properly factored in.
Yeah, this feature alone seems incredibly valuable for negotiations. It visually demonstrates that chopping the commission rate doesn't just cut the agent's gross income proportionally. Because the fixed costs and the internal percentage splits are still there, it often cuts the net retained profit by a much larger factor, maybe 2/3 or even more in this example.
Just a quick side note on currency, too. The calculator might let you display the final outputs in USD or GBP or JMD, but it's important to remember the underlying calculations, especially when dealing with Jamaican properties and local costs, always need to be rooted in JMD to maintain accuracy against the local market conditions and agreements.
Running through those case studies, seeing the money flow down that revenue ladder, it's really eye-opening. So if an agent uses a tool like this, plugs in their numbers, and the result just looks way too small, my net looks small, the source material gives a really useful FAQ checklist for troubleshooting, right?
Yeah, it's like a quick audit process. First,
Yeah.
check the external pressures. Did you accidentally leave the co-broke turned on at 50% when you're trying to model a direct sale? That's a huge factor. Then check the internal pressures. Is your broker split percentage set correctly? Is it maybe too high compared to what you actually agreed? Could you remember to include that sequential brokerage or franchise fee if your company charges one?
And then, critically, check if your expense inputs are messing things up. Are those desk fees or other recurring costs amortized correctly? Are they too high? And probably the biggest potential error point for large projects. Did you accidentally leave the expense allocation set to per unit instead of shared?
We really need to hammer home that strategy point again for multi-unit projects. It's arguably the most crucial setting in the whole model for these types of deals.
Remind us one more time, why is that so critical?
Because for a big development with many units, Choosing shared expense allocation recognizes the reality of the situation. Those large, fixed upfront costs, like launching the main marketing campaign, the initial setup time, those are investments made to secure and service the entire listing, not just the first unit that happens to sell. By spreading those costs evenly across all the units, you get a realistic picture of the average net gain per unit over the project's lifetime. If you forget to switch it to shared, your initial projections will look terrible, understating the overall profitability. You might even walk away from what could have been a very lucrative contract, all because of a flawed calculation based on the wrong setting.
And having this clear, accurate data that leads directly to the core value proposition for the agent, right? Using this kind of detailed breakdown in their negotiations with the developer.
Absolutely. The real power here is showing the developer the actual agent take-home amount per unit, after all the splits and costs are accounted for. The developer often just sees that top-line 5% gross commission figure. By presenting a detailed financial model like this, the agent isn't just asking for a fee, they're demonstrating transparency and credibility. They're showing their math. It helps shift the conversation away from just haggling over that top percentage point and towards understanding the agent's real financial position in the deal.
Yeah, it lets the agent be much more strategic in the negotiation, doesn't it? Instead of just battling over, I need 5%, not 4%, Shay, they can maybe show the developer, look, based on my costs and splits, my net is X, but if you, Mr. Developer, could maybe help subsidize this $500,000 marketing campaign up front, that actually increases my net take-home significantly, perhaps more than arguing over 0.5% on the commission rate would. It focuses the negotiation on the specific leverage points that actually make the biggest difference to the agent's bottom line.
Exactly. The agent can pivot the discussion towards things like contributions to fixed costs, or maybe slightly better terms on recurring fees. Things that might be easier for a developer to concede than changing the headline commission rate that might be standardized across all their agents.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, pulling it all together. We've basically established that this huge gap, this chasm between the gross commission number and the final net profit, it's created by this sequence, this layering effect of percentage cuts and fixed costs. The listing agent is effectively managing a budget, that initial commission pool that has to satisfy potentially a co-broke agent, their own broker, maybe a franchise, and cover all their own operating costs, all before they get to keep what's left.
Yeah, it forces you to realize that 5% commission isn't the agent's income. It's the operating budget for getting the sale done. And the agent has to be a pretty sharp financial manager just to make sure they retain a profitable slice of that budget for themselves.
So the big takeaways we've hit on, the absolutely massive impact of that 50% co-broke that's usually the single biggest variable. Then there's that financial squeeze from franchise fees sometimes hitting after the main broker split. And the absolute necessity of using that shared expense allocation when modeling multi-unit projects.
Right. So maybe to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. Something building on that my net looks small checklists. We spend a lot of time talking about the big percentage splits, understandably. But remember, those smaller, maybe fixed or recurring costs, like the monthly desk fees, or maybe that 1% or 5% brokerage or franchise fee. How much difference does it really make if an agent successfully negotiates a small reduction in one of those recurring fees? Say, getting that $10,000 monthly desk fee waived entirely for the duration of the project, or negotiating that 5% brokerage fee down to just 4%. Think about the lifetime impact of that small, ongoing saving on the agent's total net earnings over a multi-year development cycle, like our 29-unit example selling over 12 months or more. Even if the main 5% commission rate stays exactly the same, how much does optimizing those smaller, persistent costs change the game? That's often where sustainable long-term profit is really built in this business, and managing those seemingly minor details. Something to think about.